Elliot Griggs was having a miserable day. His ancient delivery ship rattled and groaned as it zipped through the void of space, carrying a cargo of DNA samples meant for research colonies. The hum of the engines grated on his nerves, and the flickering console lights offered no comfort. He leaned back in his chair, kicking his feet onto the dashboard, muttering to himself. "Another boring day, another boring delivery," he grumbled, flipping a switch to monitor autopilot. "Why couldn't I get the cool jobs? Exploring uncharted planets, meeting alien species, nope, just delivering genetic goo to eggheads." The ship jolted violently, sending him tumbling to the floor. Alarms blared, and warning lights danced across the control panel. Panicked, Elliot scrambled to his seat, slamming buttons in a desperate attempt to stabilize the vessel. "Ship malfunction detected. Cause pilot incompetence," the onboard AI quipped in its monotone voice. "Oh, shut up!" Elliot yelled, yanking at the controls. The ship spun out of control, hurtling toward a green and blue planet below. With a deafening crash, the ship plummeted through the atmosphere, smashing into a thick jungle. Smoke billowed from the wreckage, and Elliot groaned, pushing aside debris as he crawled out. "Well, that's just great," he muttered, surveying the twisted remains of his ship. "Stuck on a planet in the middle of nowhere. Could this get any worse?" It got worse. Towering shadows fell over him as a group of enormous, stunningly beautiful women emerged from the jungle. Each one stood at least 20 feet tall, their shimmering skin adorned with tribal markings, their eyes glowing with curiosity. Elliot froze, his jaw dropping as the women encircled him. One of them crouched down, her immense face level with his, and spoke in a melodic yet commanding tone. "You are the chosen one?" What?" Elliot stammered, his voice cracking. No chosen one here. Just a guy who delivers stuff." The women exchanged puzzled glances, their communication seemingly telepathic. One of them pointed to the DNA drones that had spilled from the wreckage, their sleek, metallic forms gleaming in the sunlight. "The sacred machines," the tallest woman said, her voice filled with awe. "He carries the tools of life." Elliot looked at the drones and back at the women, realization dawning. "Oh, no! These aren't, this is a mistake." Ignoring his protests, the women erupted into cheers, lifting him off the ground like a rag doll. He flailed helplessly as they carried him to a massive clearing, where an intricately carved stone altar awaited. "Place him here," the matriarch commanded, her tone brooking no argument. Elliot was set on the altar like an offering, surrounded by a crowd of giant women bowing in reverence. His protests fell on deaf ears as the matriarch stepped forward, her expression stern yet expectant. "You possess the gift of life," she declared. "You must share it with us, or face the consequences." Wait! This is all a big misunderstanding," Elliot shouted, his voice echoing across the clearing. "I'm not some fertility god. I'm just a delivery guy." The matriarch's gaze narrowed. "Then prove it. Show us the power of your sacred machines." Desperate to avoid whatever consequences meant, Elliot reached for one of the drones. He fiddled with its controls, hoping to demonstrate its harmless nature. Instead, the drone activated, projecting a hologram of a hybrid humanoid creature, half Elliot, half giant woman. The crowd gasped in awe, and the matriarch's stern expression softened into a triumphant smile. "It is true. He is the one." Elliot slapped his forehead. "Great. Just great." The women erupted into chants, hoisting him onto their shoulders and parading him through the jungle. As they celebrated, Elliot's mind raced. He needed to find a way off this planet, fast. But for now, he was their reluctant, chosen one, and he had no idea how to fix the mess he'd stumbled into. Elliot was now sitting in what could only be described as a ceremonial hall, its walls adorned with ancient symbols and giant carvings of what appeared to be more of these towering women. The entire place smelled like incense, mixed with the faint aroma of exotic flowers. He was perched uncomfortably on a massive cushion, feeling like a flea in a world of giants. The women had circled around him, each of them staring at him like he was some kind of divine artifact. He tried not to think about how he must look, sweating, disheveled, and completely out of his depth. So, what happens now? Elliot asked, his voice cracking. His stomach was in knots from the overwhelming situation. The matriarch, the largest and most imposing of the women, smiled down at him as if he were a child who had finally figured out how to tie his own shoes. She gestured to the other women, who immediately began preparing what looked like a feast. The food was strange, consisting mostly of fruit the size of his torso, and various nuts and meats that looked entirely foreign. "You will be honored, chosen one," the matriarch said, her voice deep and rich with authority. "It is time to perform the sacred ritual." Elliot's eyes widened. "Ritual? What do you mean by that?" The matriarch's smile stretched even wider, her eyes gleaming. "The ritual that ensures the survival of our tribe. The sacred ceremony that requires your contribution." Elliot swallowed hard. "Look, I'm just a delivery guy, okay? I don't even know what you mean by contribution. I just deliver packages." The women around him exchanged looks that seemed to convey both confusion and amusement. One of the younger women, probably the equivalent of a teenager, leaned forward and whispered something to the matriarch. "You must understand," the matriarch continued, her voice full of grace and confidence. "You carry the sacred tools. The machines you carry are said to bring forth life. You will provide us with your seed, so that our tribe may grow stronger." Elliot blinked, utterly horrified. Wait! No! This is a huge mistake. These are just delivery drones. They're for genetic samples, not that. I don't even know what you're talking about." But his protests only seemed to fuel their excitement. They began to chant in a language he couldn't understand, though their tone was undeniably reverent, as if he were some kind of god they'd been waiting for centuries to arrive. He tried to stand up, but the matriarch motioned for him to stay, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder with surprising strength. "There is no need to be shy," she said softly. "Your honor is a gift to us. You must prepare for the ceremony." He wanted to run, but the overwhelming size and strength of the women surrounding him made that impossible. He had no idea what would happen if he resisted, and his mind was racing for some kind of escape plan, though, admittedly, he wasn't coming up with much. He had no weapons, no backup, no clue what he was supposed to do next. Suddenly, one of the women returned, holding up what looked like a giant fruit, a massive, glossy yellow thing that shimmered in the light. She offered it to Elliot with a strange reverence. "You must partake in the offering, chosen one." Elliot stared at the fruit in her hands, his mind a chaotic mess. "I don't want any fruit. I just want to go home," he said, his words sounding frantic even to him. The matriarch, clearly misunderstanding his panic, gave a small nod. "You are nervous, but this is normal. All the great ones before you were nervous too. It is the way of things. Now take the fruit and eat. Strength and wisdom come from it." There was no convincing these people. He was trapped, and the more he tried to explain himself, the more they seemed to misunderstand. They all believed he was some sort of divine figure sent to save them, and they were treating him like royalty. But Elliot was no savior, and he was certainly no fertility god. He just wanted to get back to his job and never speak of this planet again. He reluctantly took the fruit from the woman, trying not to make a scene. The matriarch beamed as if he had just performed the most sacred act in the universe. Yes. You are doing it. You will lead us to glory." As Elliot bit into the fruit, he tasted something sweet but foreign. The texture was thick, almost custard-like, and it coated his tongue in a way he couldn't quite describe. Still, he chewed and swallowed, trying to act like he was playing along. In reality, he was just trying to keep his head down and figure out a way to get through this. Suddenly, a sharp noise pierced the air, a drone whizzed by, followed by several more that zipped around him like they were on a mission. The women gasped in awe. "It's working!" one of the women shouted, clapping her hands in joy. "The machines! They are activated!" Elliot's eyes went wide. He looked up at the matriarch, who seemed utterly pleased with herself. "Now, my chosen one," she said, "you will show us the next part. The part where we become stronger." She gestured toward the altar, where a series of strange symbols were carved into the stone. "Next part?" Elliot asked, his voice shaking. "What next part? There's no next part. You've got the wrong guy. I'm not even supposed to be here. I just deliver things for a living." The matriarch's face softened as she placed a hand on his head in what he could only assume was meant to be comforting. "Do not worry, chosen one. You will guide us through this. We trust in your wisdom." Elliot had no idea what kind of mess he was about to walk into. But as the women began to hum in what sounded like a song of worship, he realized he wasn't going to escape easily. Not without playing their game, at least for a while. "All right," he said with a resigned sigh. "I'll play along for now. But as soon as I can, I'm getting out of here." The women erupted in cheers as if he just made some kind of profound declaration. He had no idea how to get out of this, but for the moment, it seemed like the only thing he could do was roll with it. He was in over his head, and the only way out seemed to be to make the best of the situation. As the women began preparing what looked like a ritual dance, Elliot couldn't help but feel that this was the weirdest, most surreal day of his life. And it wasn't over yet. Elliot's situation had gone from bad to worse, and now, it was teetering on the edge of pure absurdity. The women were dancing around him, chanting in a rhythmic harmony that reverberated through the entire clearing. It was like something out of an ancient fertility rite, and Elliot, completely out of his element, was at the center of it all. They moved with grace, their towering forms swaying in sync with each other. Their eyes were all locked onto him, their expressions a mix of reverence and anticipation. As the matriarch took her place at the front of the group, she raised her arms to the sky, her voice booming in the same strange language the others had used. Her energy was overwhelming, like a force of nature, and it made Elliot feel small despite his own considerable size. He had no idea what was coming next, but he could feel the heat rising in his cheeks. One of the women stepped forward, holding out an ornate golden bowl filled with something that looked like a shimmering liquid. She approached Elliot with great care, as if he were the most fragile thing in the universe. "The sacred drink," she said in a hushed tone, offering it to him. Elliot stared at the bowl, his eyes widening. He wasn't sure what to make of it, but it looked far too important to refuse. So, with all the dignity he could muster, he took the bowl and raised it to his lips, taking a tentative sip. The taste was indescribable. It was sweet and spicy all at once, with a sharp tang that made his mouth tingle. His body felt warmer, his senses heightened, and he had to admit, it was a bit intoxicating. But that only made him more nervous. What had he just drunk? What was this sacred drink supposed to do? The moment he set the bowl down, the women erupted into cheers. They raised their arms in triumph, their voices lifting in unison. The matriarch beamed at him, her eyes full of pride. "The chosen one is ready!" she proclaimed. "I'm not ready for anything," Elliot muttered under his breath, feeling like he was in a fever dream. But of course, no one was listening. They were too busy celebrating. Suddenly, the matriarch beckoned for him to follow. The women cleared a path for him, and without any other choice, he found himself walking in the direction they indicated. It seemed like they wanted him to lead them somewhere, but to where? What did they think he could do for them? Elliot looked around, his mind racing. He had no answers, no plans. There was only one thing he knew for sure: these women had misunderstood everything. He wasn't a god. He wasn't some magical hero. He was just a guy who wanted to get back to his job and go home. But as he glanced around at the adoring faces of the women, it was clear they weren't going to let him go without fulfilling some role they'd assigned to him. One of the younger women, who had been among the most enthusiastic of the group, hurried over to him with a strange object in her hand. It was a large, intricately carved stone, shaped like a key. She handed it to Elliot, her hands trembling with excitement. "The key to the temple," she whispered, almost reverently. "You must lead us to it, chosen one." Elliot raised an eyebrow, unsure whether to laugh or scream. A temple? What temple? He asked, his patience wearing thin. The woman's face fell slightly, but the matriarch stepped forward and answered with unshakable confidence. The Temple of Life. The place where your power will manifest and bring our people the fertility we need. At that moment, Elliot realized he had to do something. If he didn't play along, who knew what kind of chaos would unfold? All right, he said, trying to keep his cool. I'll lead you to this temple. But you've got to listen to me afterward. I'm not your fertility god, okay? I'm a delivery guy. The women nodded in unison, their expressions as serious as if they were about to embark on some great quest. Elliot couldn't help but feel like he was on the edge of a disaster, and no matter what he did, there was no turning back now. As they made their way deeper into the jungle, the women began to sing in low, melodic voices. It was like a hymn, and it gave the whole atmosphere an eerie, almost hypnotic feel. Elliot found himself walking in rhythm with their song, his earlier frustration starting to fade into an odd sense of calm. The path they took seemed to grow more mystical the further they ventured. Trees with massive, glowing flowers lined the way, casting an ethereal glow on the jungle floor. It felt like they were traveling through a dreamscape, and for a moment, Elliot almost forgot about the absurdity of his situation. But then, as they arrived at the base of a massive, ancient stone structure, all the previous confusion came rushing back. The temple was nothing like what he had imagined. It was a giant, monolithic building, carved with symbols and figures that looked like ancient depictions of women and fertility rituals. The sheer scale of it was overwhelming, and it was hard not to feel like he was about to do something that would affect the course of this tribe's entire existence. He stepped forward, holding the stone key the young woman had given him, and inserted it into a large, ornate slot in the stone door. The moment it clicked into place, a deep rumble shook the earth beneath him, and the massive stone doors slowly creaked open. The women gasped in awe, their faces lighting up with anticipation. They whispered excitedly among themselves, but all Elliot could do was stare at the entrance to the temple, his mind racing. Was he really about to walk into some ancient chamber and perform some sort of divine act? Or was this just a bad dream he would wake up from any second? One of the women stepped forward, reaching for his hand. You have done it, chosen one, she said, her voice filled with gratitude. Now lead us into the sacred place. Elliot sighed deeply, his hands trembling as he stepped inside the temple. The chamber was massive, with walls lined with carvings and intricate murals depicting fertility rites, the growth of crops, and the prosperity of the tribe. But what caught his attention was the centerpiece of the room, a giant, stone altar, much like the one they had tried to place him on earlier. As he approached it, the women began to form a circle around him. Their eyes were fixed on him, their expectation palpable. For a moment, Elliot froze. He had no idea what they expected from him. But when he glanced around at the giant faces staring at him, he realized there was no turning back now. He had to figure out some way to defuse this situation before it spiraled even further. All right, he muttered. This is insane, but here we go. And with that, he took the first step toward whatever was waiting for him. Elliot's nerves were at an all-time high. The women surrounding him were not only eagerly awaiting his every move but also looking at him as if he were some kind of mythical figure sent to lead them to salvation. His palms were sweaty, his stomach churned with anxiety, and all he could think was, what the hell had he gotten himself into? As he stood at the altar, staring at the ancient symbols carved into the stone, Elliot tried to think of any possible way out of this madness. There was no emergency beacon, no way to contact anyone back on Earth. He was completely cut off from his reality. His earlier resolve to get through this with a bit of humor was starting to evaporate, replaced by a growing panic. The women were still chanting, swaying rhythmically, as if preparing for some sort of ceremony. He turned to look at the matriarch, hoping that perhaps she could offer some clarity. She smiled at him, a smile that seemed both comforting and unnervingly confident. The ritual is about to begin, chosen one, she said. The power of the temple will flow through you. Elliot blinked rapidly, taking a step back. Power? What kind of power? I'm not what you think I am. I'm not a god or a fertility king or whatever you believe I am. But the matriarch's expression remained unchanged. You are the one who will restore balance. You are the one who will bring us new life. Elliot was beyond frustrated at this point. How was he supposed to explain that he was just a regular deliverman who had crash-landed on their planet by accident? It wasn't like he had a magic sperm cannon ready to save the day. All he had was a ridiculously bad luck streak and a very, very confused mind. Before he could gather his thoughts, one of the younger women stepped forward, holding a large ceremonial bowl filled with an unknown substance. The bowl was made of some kind of polished, iridescent material that shimmered under the light. Without asking, she tipped the bowl toward him, and a small stream of liquid began to pour out, landing on his hands. "Drink the sacred nectar," she said with a reverence that made his stomach turn. Elliot glanced down at the liquid, trying to muster the courage to take it. It looked like some kind of fruit juice, but there was a peculiar glow to it that made him more wary. He wanted to refuse, to tell them to stop the madness, but the look of adoration in their eyes stopped him. They weren't going to take no for an answer. With a heavy sigh, he brought the bowl to his lips and took a sip. The taste hit him like an explosion of sweetness, rich and tangy, with an undertone that was almost intoxicating. His head began to spin, his vision blurred for a second. It wasn't just the flavor that had affected him. It felt as though the liquid was seeping into his very bones, stirring something deep within him. "Good," the matriarch said with a nod. "Now you are ready." Elliot's heart skipped a beat. Ready? Ready for what? To fulfill some bizarre fertility prophecy? To lead these women to what? He had no idea what was going on anymore. Before he could formulate any more questions, the women began to circle him, chanting louder and faster, their voices rising in volume. The energy in the room was thick, almost oppressive, as though the very air around him was vibrating with anticipation. The matriarch stepped forward and placed her hand on his chest, her eyes locked onto his with an intensity that made him feel like he was about to burst into flames. "The time has come," she said, her voice low and commanding. "Let the new life begin." And then, everything went absolutely wild. One of the younger women, who had been standing near the altar, suddenly rushed up to him. Without warning, she grabbed his hand and placed it on her stomach. Elliot was too stunned to react at first, and before he knew it, the other women had joined in, each of them taking turns guiding his hand to different parts of their bodies. He felt his face turn bright red, and his mind screamed in protest. "What the hell is going on?" he managed to choke out. The women continued to surround him, paying no mind to his frantic exclamations. They were completely absorbed in their own world, performing what could only be described as an elaborate and somewhat confusing fertility ritual. To him, it felt more like an awkward, misplaced dance of sorts. Elliot was growing desperate, wanting nothing more than to escape the chaos. But there was no way out. These women were insistent, almost hypnotically so, as they continued their strange ceremony. His body felt like it was being pulled in every direction, and the more they pressed their hands against him, the more overwhelmed he became. Finally, just when he thought he might lose his mind, the matriarch stepped forward again. She raised her arms high, signaling the end of the ritual. The chanting stopped, and the women slowly backed away, their expressions a mix of satisfaction and eager expectation. Elliot stood there, completely stunned and unable to comprehend what had just happened. The matriarch gave him a knowing look, her eyes sparkling with something that bordered on pride. "The ceremony is complete," she said, her voice filled with finality. "The balance has been restored. You have brought us what we need." Elliot blinked in confusion, still trying to process the sheer absurdity of everything. What did I do?" he asked, his voice shaky. The matriarch's smile deepened. "You have given us hope. You have provided the spark that will bring us new life. Your essence is the key." Elliot's face flushed with embarrassment, and he glanced nervously around at the women. "Wait, so this whole thing, this wasn't just some misunderstanding? You weren't trying to—" "No," she said, interrupting him with a gentle shake of her head. It was not a misunderstanding. You were sent to us for this purpose. Your arrival was prophesied. The words hit him like a ton of bricks. His mind raced, but there was no denying it. Somehow, he had become part of this tribe's legend. He had unwittingly become a symbol of fertility and life to these women, all because he had delivered the wrong package to the wrong planet. Elliot ran a hand through his hair, staring blankly at the matriarch. This is insane. But it is the truth, she said softly. And now you are a part of our people, chosen one. Elliot took a deep breath, trying to steady his thoughts. He had no idea how to get out of this bizarre situation, but for better or worse, he was now caught up in their belief system. And somehow, that seemed like the least of his problems. As the women began to gather around him again, their eyes shining with admiration, Elliot realized one thing: there was no going back. He had become an accidental hero, a savior to a tribe of giant women who had mistaken him for something far greater than he could ever be. And as much as he wanted to escape, a part of him was curious to see where this absurd journey would lead.